Back in my board gamer era, I covered today's topic in a review. Like most videos from that era of my existence, I'm dissatisfied with it, and since I've recently completed yet another playthrough of Dark Souls 3, I figured we might as well talk about it again. Only this time I'm slightly less crap at this than I was before, and this was proven by scientists. That's my story, and I'm sticking by it. Dark Souls 3, as I have said before, is one of my favourite games ever made, as it got me not only into the Dark Souls franchise, but also inspired my love of the Souls-like subgenre. Or Soulsborne if you're one of those people who absolutely must remind everyone that Bloodborne also exists, because if a moment passes without you saying so, then all is lost.
Those who live in... Wait, we did that glass houses bit a couple of weeks ago. It's just easier to call you a hypocrite.
Hey, don't use facts as... oh, balls, I already used that one as well. Crap, I've exhausted all my best bits.
Those were your best bits?
Yeah, depressing, isn't it? But enough of all that jazz, we've got a game to talk about, damn it. But I don't want to interrupt the flow of the actual review to come, so I'm going to stick this bit in here. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a few ways you can do that. First of all, you can give this video a like, maybe leave a comment and subscribe for future content. To support the channel directly, go to my Patreon page and pledge £1 a month. This will get you 24 hours early access to new review videos, shoutouts at the end of videos, and you'll even get to suggest games for me to cover. Or if you'd like something more tangible back for your support, then head over to my T-Bill shop. The links to both my T-Bill shop and my Patreon page are in the description of this video, so be sure to check them out. Sorted, now we can get on with it. So my lovelies, I welcome you to this re-review of Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3 is the third installment in the Dark Souls series, presently serving as the final installment, and the director Hidetaka Miyazaki hasn't entirely ruled out Dark Souls 4, hence why I say presently. Dark Souls 3, like the previous installments, is a third-person action RPG with a focus on careful preparation, stamina management, and unforgiving challenge. We play as an unkindled one, an undead risen from their grave and sent on a quest to slay the Lords of Cinder so that we may preserve this world. Dark Souls 3 is no different to the rest of its series in that it has a rich and complex narrative. To sum up its story effectively, I'll need to omit some specifics, but basically, the Unkindled rise from the grave with the tolling of the firelink bell, something that's only set to occur when the very first flame that brings light to this world and power to its rulers begins to fade, and when the Lords of Cinder who had otherwise linked the flame to preserve the world themselves have fled, abandoning their duties and their thrones. We're sent through a post-apocalyptic dark fantasy world where everything is, for one reason or another, extremely hostile and ready to kill you. You'll face many gruesome challenges as you fight your way to the Lords of Cinder and bring them down. But it's only through challenging the Lords of Cinder that we can reach the kiln of the first flame, and complete the ritual to link the fire and preserve this world. And that is, if you want to save the world, as there are a total of 4 endings here. The easiest one to achieve is the linking of the fire, prolonging this age of light and seeing your character ignite in flame as they become a vessel for the first flame. I probably shouldn't have put flame twice in that sentence, but I did anyway. The other 3 endings are a bit harder to achieve and often require that you go through secret areas or unlock hidden quest paths. The other endings are choosing to end the Age of Fire and begin an Age of Dark, embrace this Twilight era in which we find ourselves, or wrestle the flame away from the mantle and keep it for ourselves. As with the previous games in the series, Dark Souls 3 delivers its narrative through limited character interactions, through item descriptions in the inventory menu, and through environmental suggestion. If you like though, this could just be a game where some nameless warrior has committed to fighting every big thing that stands in their way, thus is the beauty of the hands-off approach. Letting the player decide on their own level of engagement can be a really good thing if pulled off right. And I'd say Dark Souls 3, as with the prior games, does so indeed. In many ways, the story that you assemble in your own head is the story that we're here to experience. One of my favourite things about Dark Souls as a series when it comes to its lore and storytelling is just how much it leaves open to suggestion. You'll never fully understand what's happening in Dark Souls. The creators intentionally left some areas of history blank. Just as with real-world history, there are some things in Dark Souls that we'll just never really know. Hands-off is also the approach the game takes to its tutorial section and player training. In the first area, the most help you'll get are messages left on the floor by the devs which explain what the controls are. Beyond that, you're left to figure out everything else yourself. The first enemies you meet might not be particularly powerful. They're just mad undead dressed in light robes and wielding basic swords and spears, but even they can stomp an unprepared player into the dirt. And thus the lesson is clear: never underestimate your opponent. Another good lesson to learn early on is never let them gang up on you. Dark Souls combat has always been based around a 1v1 setup. You lock onto an enemy and you circle around them until you find the right time to hit. If you pull too many enemies at once, the odds are stacked against you and you can end up dead. Getting yourself killed means you'll drop all your souls.
That's the thing that happened to me a lot.
Ha! What a noob!
Oh, stuff it, you PC wannabe. You only just made it past the first boss.
As you kill enemies, you gather souls from them, which serve as both your currency for weapon upgrades and item purchases, and your experience points for leveling up with the Firekeeper. If you die, you drop them all and must reclaim them from your point of death, which can be an anxiety nightmare. The levels aren't physically massive, but they're packed with enemy encounters, and some can be really difficult to navigate, so you'll have to remember exactly where it was you died and survive whatever it was that killed you last time long enough to get your souls back. But pull that off and you can return to your nearest bonfire and head back to the hub. The bonfires in this game, as in all Souls games, serve as the player's checkpoints. Resting at one will recover your lost health and restore your primary healing flask, but it will also respawn the area's enemies. Sometimes it's preferable to avoid resting and focus on clearing out the area's enemies and then go back and loot the place in safety. Back at your hub, Firelink Shrine, you can visit the Firekeeper, who uses those souls you gather to level you up. You can also visit the Handmaid, who sells you goods, or you can visit the Blacksmith to upgrade your weapons. Other NPCs will appear here as the game goes on, but often you have to find them yourself, and they can be quite off the beaten path. Let's say you want to run a sorcerer build, then you're going to need to be able to buy sorceries, aren't you? Ulbeck of Vinheim, who can sell you these sorceries, is hiding in a crumbling room accessible from a thin, easily missable side path in the Crucifixion Woods. And just to add insult to injury, unless you've got at least 10 intelligence, he can't teach you sorceries. This isn't something that the game lets you know either, it's on you to figure that out. If you want to play as a nice healy cleric, then you'll need to find this woman, Irina of Kareem. She is locked in a cell, accessible from a sewer filled with some rats, which is past some catacombs filled with skeletons, which is past another sewer with an even larger rat. And the side path you need to take in order to get there you can't even unlock unless you've got a key that you purchase from the Shrine Handmaiden.
Oh, and just in case that wasn't bad enough, you also have to brave a graveyard full of enemies whilst a giant shoots huge arrows at you to get to the ash. Just in case it didn't sound like a pain in the arse yet. Fun fact, when I first played through this with Ronica, as they said, don't fall down the chasm, I heard "Ah," as their character actually fell down the chasm.
Let's say you want to be a pyromancer and throw fire at people, a relatable goal we can all agree. Just gotta drop down this cliff and navigate past some mad villages with machetes and pitchforks until you finally come to him in his cage, which doesn't even appear to be locked because he can just leave it as soon as you arrive. What if you want to play as a dark wizard of some kind? Oh, that's easy. All you have to do is brave a dungeon full of the most annoying enemy types in the game, twice, and unlock an easily missed cell in the room with the most number of these enemies you'll see anywhere in the game, and then keep talking to the person inside until she finally agrees to work with you. In Dark Souls, very little is straightforward, and you need to be keenly aware of your surroundings to truly thrive.
I wanna circle back to that little remark about me only beating the first boss. A, Devil May Cry is like way better and Dark Souls sucks. And B, maybe if you'd bothered to tell me what the best builds were, I'd have been fine.
Oh my poor sweet PS5, don't you know? There is no such thing as the perfect Dark Souls build. Each player is left to figure out what equipment works best for them. For me, a good hefty shield is the way to go. It's a bit bland, but it works for me. For some people, it's a pair of short swords. For others, it's a giant scythe that would make the Grim Reaper jealous. Some prefer to go full mage, nuking enemies with spells from afar. And some prefer to simply run past all the enemies and take on the bosses with nothing more than a toothpick and a saucepan lid. Whichever build works for you is the best build. Dark Souls 3, like the previous games, is a very personal game offering a very personal experience, teaching you to play the way that works for you. Naturally, some enemies will be weaker or stronger against your style, but another keynote here is being able to adapt when things get rough. You do also need to be patient. Rushing in and trying to hit everything at once will, more often than not, end horribly. You'll run in, swing like a madman, then see that you've depleted your stamina bar and are now surrounded by an army of undead warriors if you're not careful. Every action you take requires a little bit of stamina. Swinging your sword, blocking with your shield, doing the vital dodge roll which can help you avoid dangerous attacks, drinking from your flask, it all requires that you have some stamina. If you exhaust it, you're completely vulnerable. You can't do anything and the enemies can quickly turn you into a very dead person. It's always better to take your time and examine your enemies. A good rule of thumb to remember while playing is that enemies in full suits of plate armour like knights are typically weak to magic and lightning, and those who wear light to no armour or are just regular undead hollows are typically very weak to fire. Heavily armoured enemies are typically much more resistant to slashing attacks, and you can also find some enemies who are basically immune to one type of damage. In scenarios like this, it's good to use tools like fire bombs or elemental buffs buffs to get the advantage. There are a lot of useful items in this game, from the aforementioned loyal firebomb to the purple resin that coats your weapon in poison. You've also got throwing knives and these cool little skulls that when you throw them they divert enemy attention so that you can sneak up behind the enemy and get a few cheeky backstabs. I mentioned careful preparation earlier, and this is what I meant. It's something that all the Souls games have always been really about. Dark Souls 3 gives you all the tools you need to succeed and relies on you taking your time to figure it all out, and will punish you harshly for failing to do so. I honestly adore this game and almost everything about it. The combat feels weighty and impactful. It's the way the characters are animated when they attack and the well-chosen sound effects that all come together to create this feeling. The boss fights are mostly fantastic. They've all got their own unique soundtrack, which are almost universally amazing, not to mention appropriately epic, and they're mostly so much more lively and varied than we've seen in previous games. And the fact that so many of them have a bonfire quite close by to them, or at least a very accessible shortcut, is a godsend. It means that if you get your ass kicked, it doesn't take you too long to get back into the fray. The story and its themes are quite well crafted and explored. The characters we meet are a bit static, but they're interesting people with some cool quest lines. I think my favourite character storyline in this entire game is that of Henri, a fellow unkindled who also seeks the Lords of Cinder. The online aspects of the game are pretty good for the most part, though one thing I still don't personally enjoy that much is the PvP. See, for me, the true Dark Souls online experience is that of jolly cooperation. Players helping one another through the tough challenges of their world and toppling bosses together. This world is cruel enough with enough things trying to kill the player without an invading player being one of them. I don't know, to me the invasion system has always felt somewhat tacked on, but it could just be my own general indifference to the PvP making me think that. So take my opinion for what it's worth, although what it's worth is probably the equivalent value to a fading soul. The game's art style is really strong. I've mentioned before how the Souls games are not particularly graphically impressive, but use their brilliant art style to more than make up for this, and Dark Souls 3 absolutely knocks it out of the park. The level of detail is frankly amazing. The decaying environments are richly detailed with little cracks and dings which perfectly bring across the sense that this world is dying. The enemies are no different. Look closely on their models and you can see their decaying skin, their frayed chainmail, the little patterns on their armour, and so much more. The soundtrack is also great. Most of the time there is no background music at all, merely the ambient sound effects from the world around you, which leads to this lovely sense of atmosphere and tension. Then, as we face a boss, the music roars to life. And as a result, these fights stand out all the more. There are just so many things about this game that I utterly adore, and it's why me and Dark Souls 3 were married, at least until I cheated on her with Elden Ring. We've been to counselling, we decided we're going to try and make it work now.
Mate, what the fuck you on about?
But to say Dark Souls 3, or indeed any game, is perfect would be a nasty lie worthy of a spanking. Dark Souls 3 has way too many checkpoints, which can cheapen the sense of challenge that this game is meant to deliver. Way too many boss fights take place in cathedrals, because apparently they're really popular in this world, and it does get rather tiresome. Some bosses are just no fun to fight, like the Crystal Sage, whose teleporting and cloning abilities are nothing more than tedious fight padding. Armour feels fairly useless, and you can't upgrade it anyway like you could in previous games, though I'm not entirely sure why. And it can be way too easy to upgrade your weapons, because enemies drop a lot of upgrade material. One of the main bosses that you have to fight to progress the story, whilst lore-wise he's one of my favourite bosses, is just a gimmick fight that calls back to the original Demon Souls. And whilst the game is very much focused on the Firelink cycle that has been a big part of prior games, it's really easy to see why people could look at this game and just say it's fan service. We visit Anor Londo from the first game, the Onion Bro returns, there are these Black Knights all over the place, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, given the time since the first game and the fact that most of them were so fiercely loyal to Lord Gwyn that they followed him into the Kiln of the First Flame where he set himself on fire. Say what you will about Dark Souls 2.
Adaptability is bullshit.
Bosses are lazy.
Maps make no sense.
No one looks like an onion.
Shut it. Say what you will about Dark Souls 2, but at least it dared to be different in a world where the status quo seeks to engulf us all. Another issue I take with the game is the way it removes some of the good ideas that Dark Souls 2 introduced. Power stancing was gone, for example, and it wouldn't come back until Elden Ring. There were no additional health items like the healing stones. We didn't see bonfire aesthetics that let you bring a whole area of the game into its New Game Plus state so you could fight the boss again. Actually, those are like the 3 good ideas that Dark Souls 2 had. But if I'm being honest, nothing that Dark Souls 3 does is anywhere near a deal breaker for me. It still stands proud as not only a really good installment to the Dark Souls series, but as a really good game on its own. You might now be asking,
do I need to play the first and second game to understand what's going on?
Short answer, no. Long answer, no, and there's no guarantee it would help anyway, because unless you're paying really close attention to what's going on, then you'll probably miss half the plot anyway. Not that it really matters. The protagonists of Dark Souls games are basically just clueless undead, so it doesn't matter if you know what happened in the series beforehand. In my mind, every Dark Souls game can just be played whenever you like. You don't need to know what's going on in the greater series, because each game is its own thing. Whilst Dark Souls 3 does call back to the first Dark Souls a lot, you don't really need to know that to have a good time. So the obvious final verdict is that Dark Souls 3 is a fantastic game and well worth checking out. It's a lovely release for me. It's a good chance to just chill out after playing really stressful games like Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue. Oh, you think I'm joking? Oh, you just wait and see, viewer, you just wait and see.